She doesn't look at all like a political activist. She looks much more like that pretty junior high teacher, the one who recognized your potential while others still thought you were merely foolish. Margaret Carter of Fort Worth probably has been the subject of more harsh discussions in smoke-filled rooms than most pretty Texas ladies, but a realist may have to admit that she probably earned it, just as she earned the praise that came along at about the same time from the many admirers she attracted over the past 40 years that she's been involved in Tarrant County and state politics. Unlike many liberals, Margaret Carter has a tough political mind and is convinced that winning can be as important as knowing in your heart that you're right. Not long ago, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram congratulated her on the occasion of a party in her honor and called her the Grand Dame of Texas liberals. The title seems appropriate, although a more earthy one is suggested when you watch her with her troops working over a hot county precinct map in the kitchen of Carter's comfortable Southside home. Another presidential election was coming up, and it was time again to haul out the famous Carter card file, the ammunition in this year's battle against the Texas Democrats for the Republican candidate, which is how it all started for Margaret Carter.
It was because of President Roosevelt. When he became the New Deal president and showed that he actually did have the resourcefulness and the power to accomplish things that would pull us out of the Depression, that was when many ordinary people turned their backs on him. It looks as if many Americans, as soon as a program for reform begins to be really effective, get afraid of it. And after the recovery had rescued a few of the most privileged people, they discovered that they were no longer quite so uncomfortable, and they decided that the New Deal had gone far enough. It didn't seem to us that it had.
What are y'all doing on this map now?
We're dividing. See, it has the lines for the voting precincts drawn on it, I think, and it has the lines for the senatorial districts drawn on it. We're off from Senatorial District 12, and we're grouping the precincts around the ones we live in. Ann lives in this one, and Dorothy lives in that one, and John lives in this one, and I live closer to town in this one. And each of us is assuming responsibility for a group of precincts near ours. Each of us will try to find a neighborhood center in this area. I was a half orphan and very poor, but I had the same opportunity as anybody else to go to a good school. Mr. Pascal was the principal of Central High School then, and he ran a good school with an excellent library where young people who really wanted to learn and prepare for college, which was more of a privilege then than it is now, could do that. I decided, I was telling Mona the other day, that I decided when I entered junior high school that I was going to be the valedictorian of the graduating class at Central High School.
So this is the detail work of the campaign.
Yeah, this is the boiler room. This is the campaign. It seemed to me that if our religion were any good, it ought to be good enough to be put into practice in many areas of life. And of course, democracy is a kind of political expression of the basic principles of Christianity.
Do you see yourself? You're called. Star-Telegram called you recently the Grand Dame of the Texas liberals. Do you see yourself, or have you seen yourself through the years as a liberal? Or?
Oh yeah.
Margaret's been active longer than the rest of us, and has more background in who's who and what pressure points are in various parts of the county.
And what we want each
Our
of
experience
the
is not as broad as hers.
precinct leaders to do is to develop a file like this one. This is a file of 4x6 cards with a great deal of information potentially about each person who is a registered voter in the precinct.
Each person in the precinct.
Yes. Now,
Do you keep those up to date?
Yeah, this is up to date.
That's why you got those 10,000 cards.
Yeah. The worst of the Depression hit our part of the country a little later than it hit the east, and people were unemployed. It was impossible to know how to cope with the poverty. There was actual starvation in the rooming houses and apartments right around the courthouse. People died of starvation on the square, and little or nothing was being done. They couldn't afford to pay for health care, and the public hospital was hopelessly crowded. People actually died on the lawn because they couldn't get into the building, even after cots had been set up in the halls and all the other available spaces for the ill and the injured. The situation in the jail was incredibly bad. The sanitary situation. There was actually water standing in some of the cells where people were kept for a long periods of time. This was the city jail I'm talking about. And of course, everyone was slow to turn loose tax money to remedy even the worst situations, because those who were employed had miserably low incomes.
Margaret, what is her special value in something like this?
Expertise, experience, background.
Well, really, it was 1940 before we were deeply involved. By 1940, the recovery had reached a good many people, and many saw no need to worry about those whom it had not reached, and there was no public official support for re-election of Roosevelt, and a good deal of well-organized opposition to a third term for Roosevelt.
And at this time, you're talking about these conditions you just described.
Well, those were local conditions, of course, which we had to meet by action at the local level, and we were also interested in politics at the city hall at that point.
What did you do? How did you get involved in that?
Well, there was, of course, we don't run as Democrats and Republicans for city office. There was an organization called the People's Progressive League, if I remember, of middle-aged men on the edge of retirement who had enough compassion to realize that something must be done, and they thought that the utilities had managed to keep themselves making substantial profits while all the other businesses that had to feel the effects of competition and the Depression had either curtailed their profits or even lost their businesses. And we thought that utility rates should be lowered, and especially that bus fares should be lower. Dr. Jack Hammond, who was a history teacher at TCU, had made a successful race for city councilman and was highlighting the details of these basic needs. He was also a minister who preached in many churches about the need to apply Christian principles to the basic needs of our neighbors in this community. He was well received. He had a flair for the dramatic and knew how to publicize the facts that he gathered. And he was elected and re-elected and then re-elected again and became the mayor of Fort Worth. We were active in his campaigns. And when he finally felt that he must resign, my husband took the seat on the city council that he vacated.
It must have been hard a lot of times along the road. Why, if you had to boil it down to just one phrase, why did you take that tough side all these years?
Well, what's the use of going where you're not needed?
You told me one time you were indebted. What do you mean by that?
Well, I do feel indebted. I was one of the underprivileged people who became privileged. And I've always enjoyed more comfort and even more respect and recognition than it seemed to me my very limited contributions entitled me to. And I've never felt that I could possibly catch up to the debt that I owe the community. And the way to pay it, I had a music teacher who gave me piano lessons when I couldn't afford to pay for them, to whom I said at the point where I was going to college and wouldn't be close enough to have any more free piano lessons, I shall never be able to repay you for what you have done for me. She said, of course you won't. You're not supposed to repay me. You're supposed to do for someone else something that they'll value as much as you value what I've done for you.
Behind you here is cans of food, it looks like. Can you tell us about those?
Well, they're kind of in joke. In the campaigns in which we become involved, I have a household allowance. And after my husband's made a substantial contribution, hello, Jack. This is my son, Jack Preston. This is Jay Milner from Channel 13. He's interviewing
Hi.
me, and these
Come
gentlemen
in.
are handling the
Right in the
film.
middle, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're making a film. That's my youngest child. He's a rock musician. And,
Oh, the food.
oh, the food.
Right.
Then I would begin to skimp on the grocery allowance so that I'd have more money to buy file cards or pay for an advertisement in the newspaper or something. And my husband once said to Don Redden, I wish you'd ever get through this campaign you're in. My wife spends so much grocery money on political expenses that I'm eating bread and stew all the time.
Can you read them over there?
Yeah, I sure can. HHH hash is one. And McGovern mayonnaise. And poll tax peas. You see, I'm a veteran of the campaign to abolish the poll tax by voting it out instead of asking the courts to invalidate it. And Truman's Homestyle tomatoes. Now, my husband was the state committeeman in 48, the year of the Truman campaign, and we carried Tarrant County for Truman, too. Then there's the Gladden stew and the Kennedy clam chowder, 91% charisma. And the Ralph Yarburg yams with extra heavy syrup.
It says serve
with plenty of ham, a staple in fine southern homes for years.
At one time, our house was one of the few places where liberals could congregate, and after a few years, I started putting a sign on the door, "Welcome until 9:30," and then bedtime. I many times suggested to them if they didn't have a home to go to, we could probably make some pallets for them.
I remember a country lawyer who spoke before Homer Rainey at a banquet where I went because I wanted to hear my old friend Homer Rainey make the main speech. He was delightful. He was trying to explain to that distinguished assemblage why anybody had asked him to be on the program. And he said, the sage of C.A.S., when asked what remarkable thing he did in the days of Robespierre, replied, I survived. I persist.